In June 2013, 24-year-old Sarah Staudte, I'm gonna say, I don't know how to pronounce this surname. I looked for the pronunciation and I still think I'm saying it wrong. I apologise. 24-year-old Sarah Staudte was taken to hospital as she had been progressively getting sick. By the time she arrived at the hospital, the doctors found that she was already in organ failure and she was nearing death. No one could figure out what was wrong with her and what was causing this mystery illness. And not only was Sarah in the intensive care unit, the ICU, Mark, her father, and Shaun, her brother, had died suddenly in a short period of time after suffering with similar symptoms. But what happened to this family? In today's True Crime and Tea case, we're going to do a deep dive into this case and see a twisted case of filicide, matricide, and deception, manipulation, and what I would call pure evil, but others may call it something else. Today's story is the Staudte case. Hey academic mamas, it's your favourite academic mama here to spill the tea, one case at a time. This is True Crime and Tea. I am your host, Lily. Today I am drinking, I got this from Pret a Manger. It's a spirulina macaron iced latte. Funny story, I have been drinking this thinking that it was made with coconut milk. It's not made of coconut milk, and the reason why I thought it was made of coconut milk is because initially when I went into Pret, I asked for a matcha because I wanted to try a matcha. No, I've never drank a matcha before. It's just I'm a typical old school coffee drinker. Anyways, but the matcha was made with coconut milk. However, they didn't have that in stock. They had this in stock, so I got this instead. But for some reason the wires got crossed and I convinced myself that this was made of coconut milk, and it wasn't. It was made with regular milk. And if you saw my last video where I said I'm cutting the dairy because I'm not supposed to be having dairy, yeah, it explains a lot. So this one is not. This one is made of coconut milk. It's actually really nice. Today's one's not as sweet as the others have been though. And I wonder if that's because it's made of a different milk. I don't know. But it's from Pret. This is going to be a long one. I think my last one was a longer one. It was like an hour. This one, there's a lot to unpack in this case. So it's probably going to be a long one too. So stay tuned and let's get into it. On April the 7th, 1951, Mark Allen Staudte was born in St. Louis, Missouri, to Henry and Dorothy Staudte. Whilst at uni, he went to St. John's College in Springfield, Kansas. He met Diane at a bluegrass music festival. The two bonded over their love and appreciation for music, and on December the 28th, 1985, they were married. When they got married, they already had their first child, Shaun, on the way. Diane was pregnant with their son Shaun, who was born 6 months after they got married in December, and he was born on July the 2nd, 1986. 2 years later, they had their first daughter, who was Sarah, and then they had Rachel, who came 2 years after. Now, I'm not saying the next one is a surprise, but a whole decade after they had Rachel, they had another daughter who was their last child, who they named Brianna. That's a big gap. So basically Brianna could get away with nothing or could get away with everything, because there was like a 10-year gap between her and her siblings. So 88 they had Sarah, 90 they had Rachel, and then basically in 2000 they had Brianna. It was like a 16-year age gap between her and her older brother. That's wild. They were similar to most families in Springfield, Missouri. They were members of the Redeemer Lutheran Church, and Diane played the organ for the church. She was the breadwinner of the family, their main source of income. She was a nurse by profession, but she was working as a health insurance agent. Mark had a passion for music. He was a lead singer, but also played the guitar and the harmonica for a band called Messing with Destiny. Who knew Mark well said that he had developed an ear for music at a young age and he was a talented songwriter. The band founder had said that Mark was devoted to his family and committed to that, and then music was always his passion. And then another bandmate had later said that Mark was easygoing and always had a positive attitude and a positive influence on him. Diane seemed to be a proud and loving mother, and she was said to be very proud of her 4 children. Though the children had their varying needs, some had special needs, with Shaun being on the autistic spectrum, and then Brianna also requiring a bit of additional support at the time. She was a 4th grade student and she had a learning disability. Regardless of this, Diane praised her children, and Diane is known to have said they were little professors. They all had their little special interests, but boy, they knew everything about their special interests. That's really sweet. And then it all goes downhill from here. Shaun was often found with his nose in a book and loved reading about Sweden, architecture and mechanics. Sarah had earned a degree in French and history at Missouri State University, and she planned to be a translator. Rachel was like her parents. She loved music and she could play several different instruments as well as sing. She joined her mother in the church's band. Overall, the family seemed like they were a very, very happy family in their normal 900 square foot house in Springfield, Missouri, and nothing really seemed to be out of the ordinary. They valued their faith and appeared to be happy, but behind closed doors something was brewing, but no one could predict the tragedies that would happen to the family. So with 4 children, Shaun 26, Sarah 24, Rachel 22 and little Brianna, who was around 9 at the time, the parents raising a family of 4, there would have been some pressures with raising their family. Even though Diane praised her children in public, in front of people, it became very clear that she had a favourite. Rachel was her favourite over the other siblings. She would routinely be seen and be known to praise Rachel and upload photos of her and Rachel onto social media. I think it was particularly Facebook she liked to use. Mark didn't really have an income, so he would take on odd jobs related to the band for some extra money, for some extra earnings. But as previously mentioned, Diane was the breadwinner. She was the main source of income, so this could have put some pressure on the family. And later we find out that Rachel kind of alluded to this as one of the reasons for the tragedies that would follow. So on Monday the 9th of April 2012, Diane made a Facebook post that read, "For all my friends on Facebook, this past Sunday evening, Mark, my husband of 27 years, reached his eternal home," followed by a Bible verse. The post was shocking to everyone because it seemed like it had come out of the blue. But on Easter Sunday, which was the day before the post, Diane had called 911 after finding 61-year-old Mark in bed and not responsive, not breathing. And when the emergency services arrived to the scene, they, within quite a short period of time, pronounced him dead. In Diane's description of the events of that weekend, Diane had said that Mark returned from band practice the night before, stumbling, and she had helped him to bed where he quickly fell asleep. She had also told the investigators and interviewers that Mark was a heavy drinker. She said that she wasn't really concerned when she saw him stumbling around because she had seen Mark like this before. Often is what she said. When Diane woke up the following morning, so the Easter Sunday, Mark was still asleep when she left for church. I find it interesting that she left without him, given that it was the Lord's Day, it was Easter Sunday, so you'd think the whole family would need to go to church together because they were religious, they were Christians, they were churchgoers. That would have been a day that she would have brought the family. I find that really interesting. But she stated that when she got back home, Mark was still in bed, but he wasn't breathing. So that's when she called 911. Question I have for the audience: did she not think to check on him before she left in the morning? I know, like, she said she was used to him drinking and she just left him in bed, but it seems like she didn't even check before she left in the morning, which I just think is a bit weird. Mark's bandmates were in utter disbelief. They said that he performed on stage like he was still in his early 20s. They had no idea that their friend would be dead in less than 24 hours after their last recording session. When Diane was then questioned by Springfield police, who asked her if her husband had been sick recently, she had told them that he'd been complaining of feeling weak and that he was eating less than usual but sleeping more than usual in the recent days. Now, Mark did not suffer with seizures. However, Diane told the investigators that Mark had had 3 on that Sunday, with one being just 45 minutes before she found him not breathing. I would like to understand how she knew he had a seizure if she didn't check on him and he had a seizure 45 minutes before she found out. How would she know that? That's another confusion point, because how long was it after she got home that she realized he wasn't sleeping and then she called 911? And how long was it till she realized that he had had 3 seizures? And then he wasn't breathing when she checked. That's why she called 911. It's a bit weird. And then she said he wasn't breathing, and now she's saying, because she didn't say about the seizures before, and now she's saying that he had 3 seizures. I want to add this point in as well. She was a nurse, and she didn't think that one seizure from someone who does not suffer with seizures isn't concerning. She didn't think that that was something that needed medical assistance. Dare I say it, why didn't she give him medical assistance if she was a nurse? We will continue because there's more, but I just think that in itself is extraordinarily concerning. When the officers asked Diana why she didn't call 911 sooner, she said that Mark didn't want her to. Again, don't know how that's possible, because she said he was sleeping the whole time. So when did he have the opportunity to tell her not to call the emergency services? And also, as a nurse, you can see that there's issues. You should have really done something about it. Apparently, though, nothing appeared suspicious to the police about Mark's death. He didn't have any obvious injuries, just a small amount of dried blood on the corner of his mouth, and they didn't think that was concerning. The Greene County Medical Examiner determined that his death was a result of prior medical issues and ruled it as natural causes. A memorial service was held for Mark on April the 20th at the family's church. However, people noted that at the service, it was a bit odd. Robert Masuko was the founder of the band that Mark was in, and he recalled that Diana didn't seem to be upset at all. He stated, during the memorial, she was acting more concerned about being the perfect host and making sure that the guests were looked after, but there was no sign of grief, no tears. Now, this could have been shock, or it could have been grief. We know some people respond to grief differently, and I know some people like to be busy when they're busy during times of grief. They like to feel like they need to have a distraction. So that could have been a reason. It's not completely out of the norm that she wanted to be the perfect host as a way to distract herself. Also, with some people, death takes longer to register for some than others. Death and grief looks different for many people. I know people who don't cry outwardly, they don't cry in public, they cry silently when they're by themselves. So you could argue that the reason why she was so busy is because she needed to distract herself from the fact that she just lost her husband, or she could just be a cold, calculated, evil witch. That's me trying to be objective. My opinion is that this was not grief. My opinion is that she was just completely indifferent to the circumstances, and we'll find out why she was indifferent to the circumstances. And I agree with Robert. It looked weird. Not long after Mark's death, Diane received a payout from her husband's life insurance, which was about $20,000. She used the money to buy a new house for the family. It was a bit bigger and it was in a completely different neighborhood, so they left the Springfield neighborhood. It appeared as though the family were just taking steps to move past the loss of their father and husband and look towards the future, until the next tragedy happened. The new neighbours in their new neighbourhood didn't think that the family were very social. They said that even though they was trying to be friendly with them and reach out, they would see Shaun outside mowing the lawn, but they didn't really see the family outside at all. And it was just a few months after they had moved into this new property that tragedy struck again. On the 2nd of September 2012, the neighbours looked outside and saw a coroner's van parked in front of the home. One of the neighbours walked over to Diane and wanted to know what had happened and if there was anything that she could or they could do to help. And Diane told her that her son had died. And the neighbour had said it was very matter of fact. It was very curt. It wasn't like there was no emotion in what she had said. The neighbour remembered being thrown off by how unemotional the statement was from Diane. However, now 26-year-old Shaun was dead. Diane again was interviewed by the police, and she had told the police that her son wasn't feeling well the day before, and she said that she had checked on him during the night. Then she had gone to church the next morning. She always seems to go to church as like an escape, which I get it, but I don't. When she returned home around 12:30 in the afternoon, she found Shaun laying on the floor of his bedroom with a blanket over his midsection. She checked for a pulse but couldn't find one, so then she called 911. These things seem to be happening a lot when she goes to church. Like there's someone falls unwell when she's like the day before she goes to church. They don't do anything about it the day before, and then she just leaves the house. And I know it's only twice, but it just seems like her excuse is, I was going to worship to ask for repentance for what she was basically about to do. It just seems very odd, very cruel and unusual that the timing just seems off. And for me personally, I know if my children are unwell, I'm not leaving them at home to go to church. I'm going to stay, make sure that I can nurse them back to health, or if I need to, take them to the hospital or to the doctors. So it's just a bit weird. Shaun had reportedly been having flu-like symptoms for 3 weeks leading up to his death, and he had been complaining of nausea, diarrhea, body aches and headaches. Unlike his dad though, Shaun did suffer with seizures, and Diane had said that he had one a few days before he died. But despite his symptoms, Shaun hadn't gone to the hospital or seen a doctor because she said he was staying hydrated. But again, the officers didn't see any obvious sign of injury on Shaun, but he again did have a little bit of blood on the corner of his mouth. This time, the Greene County Medical Examiner reported that Shaun's death was due to natural causes as a result of prior medical issues. I want to say Mark had no prior medical history to note. He didn't suffer with seizures, so I don't understand how they've done this twice. Whereas Shaun did, he suffered with seizures, but But again, like she had done with Mark, Diane again posted on Facebook following his death, but it was about 3 weeks after his death that she had posted. There was no obituary and no service for Shaun. He died 147 days after his father. Now, what seems really suspicious to me is the length of time compared to her husband that it took her to post about her son's passing. The lack of compassion that she showed, especially for family and people that may have wanted to pay their respects to Shaun. She didn't bother putting on a service for him. She waited 3 weeks to post about it, so it's past now. No one can really do anything about it. She didn't bother to write a small little obituary for him or even pay for a service. Like, it's just evil. How can you not look at that and think, as a mother, why wouldn't you want to allow people to pay their respects to your son, even if the cause, even more so that the cause of death was listed as natural causes? It just seems really, really evil that she wouldn't have made arrangements for people to pay their respects, even if she didn't want to. In June of 2013, Diane and her daughter Rachel brought 24-year-old Sarah into the emergency room, into a nearby hospital. She had been extremely ill lately, and she had been suffering with flu-like symptoms that were increasing in severity. Doctors who evaluated Sarah said that she was one of the sickest 24-year-olds they had ever treated, and at the time she was in multiple organ failure. Everything was shutting down, and strangely they couldn't figure out why. They couldn't understand what was going on with her. On the 9th of June 2013, Diane posted on her Facebook page, asking for prayers as my daughter Sarah is in critical condition in the ICU tonight. It seems like whenever she wants attention, she posts. That's just an observation, but that's what it seems like. Doctors didn't think that Sarah would actually recover given how severe her symptoms were. She was on life support, and even though the doctors were still trying to rule out things, they didn't seem to be any closer to finding out what was causing Sarah's deadly illness. On the 11th of June, Springfield police received an anonymous phone call, and the caller had said that they believed Diane could be responsible for 2, maybe 3 homicides, and that her family had experienced 2 suspicious deaths in a very short space of time, and that a 3rd member was in the ICU. They had basically sent something under the radar, letting the police know that this woman's got 2 suspicious deaths, and now one of her other family members is in intensive care with the same symptoms. Initially, the police officers were skeptical. I don't know why they would be, but given the fact that Springfield was not the sort of place where things like this happen, they definitely didn't think that it would be a mother doing this to her family in Springfield. So they were a bit skeptical about looking into this. But because of the previous tip, detective did start looking into the deaths of Mark and Shaun, and they started pulling their death records. They started putting the paperwork together. They reached out to the officers who had been on the scene when Mark died, and one of the officers recalled how Diane kept on stepping over her husband while they were talking. She kept on stepping over the body of her husband while they were talking. Very strange. But what is even stranger to me is that he saw that, and he didn't see that as a red flag. He said it stuck with him because of how odd it was. But yet he did not flag it. He did not think that was a red flag. Okay. Shaun's report was similar, a death from natural causes. Detectives noted that his report, like Mark's, noted a small amount of dried blood around his mouth. It seems like the symptoms of both Mark and Shaun had been extremely similar. They were both complaining about the same kind of symptoms leading up to their deaths. And the symptoms that they had were very, very similar, if not the same, to the symptoms that Sarah had been experiencing prior to being admitted to hospital with organ failure. So because of all this, whilst the investigations were taking place, the doctors were continuing to search for what was causing Sarah's condition. They ruled out drug use or an infection, but they were still unable to rule anything in. They still could not find the cause of what was making her ill. One of the detectives that spoke to the doctor that was treating Sarah and had told him about the tip that they received, he asked the doctor if he believed that something suspicious was behind Sarah's illness, and the doctor said he absolutely believed there was something strange going on, and that now he was considering that Sarah could have possibly have been poisoned. The doctors thought it could have possibly been heavy metal poisoning or even arsenic. Sarah's blood was then sent off for testing, but the results would take several days. This is not like CSI or Law and Order, where they run over to the scientist and they say, can you run these through the lab, and then an hour later the test results are ready. No, these things take time, so they sent the bloods off for testing. Now, you would think that a mother who is grieving, who has lost her husband, she's lost her son to similar symptoms that her daughter is now suffering from, you would think that she would be in the hospital by her side every day, opening time till closing time, and that she would be beside herself, distraught, on the doctor saying, come on, what's going on with my daughter? I need to find out what's wrong with her. You would think that she would be there with worry and frustration that the diagnosis is taking so long and her daughter is just getting sicker and sicker. But no, Diane was actually overheard a number of times by several nurses making jokes and laughing. They even said that she was talking about going on a vacation and how Sarah's condition was not going to prevent her from going. Unbelievably though, Sarah's condition began to stabilize. She was still critical, but it was possible that she might survive this awful situation that she's going through. A week after Sarah's bloods were sent out, the results came back, but they were negative again. They still had no idea what was making or what had made Sarah so sick. But I think at this point, the investigators and everybody that was involved in the case, they believed that she was definitely poisoned. I think by this point they were looking at the circumstances and were like, no, this is off. The behavior is off. The previous deaths are suspicious and her general demeanor is off. Something is up. She must have been poisoned. Detectives now decided to bring Diane in for questioning, and the detective who had questioned her later said that it was one of the most stressful interviews he'd ever done, because at that point they had no physical evidence tying Diane to the deaths of her husband and of her son, or to Sarah's illness. So what their detective told her was that they were now re-examining Shaun's autopsy, that thankfully the medical examiner still had some tissue samples left from the autopsy, and he asked Diane if something abnormal was to come back from Shaun's results, how would she be able to explain that? Diane said she wouldn't be able to explain that. Diane told the detective that Mark had a lot of strange people that he hung out with that were heavy into drugs, and that she wouldn't be surprised if that contributed to his death. The medical examiner had found no evidence that Mark was into heavy drugs. And then Diane had also mentioned that Sarah might have also wanted to hurt herself, but she then said that she had no idea about what happened. The detective then brought up Diane's love and dedication to the church and how strong her faith was. He said that he was similar in his faith, and he told Diane that she was a good woman with good intentions, but that he understood that people can reach breaking points. And he continued by saying that it's important to seek forgiveness and to be honest. Diane admitted that she was having difficulties with Sarah because her school loan bills were coming in and Sarah didn't have a job and she didn't seem to want to get a job. And then she said that Mark was running around along with using drugs and alcohol. The detective then said to Diane, you have to let me help you. And then she responded by saying, put it really short and sweet, I knew they were drinking Antifreeze. The detective continued talking to Diane, explaining that at this point she just needed to be truthful. She needed to confess. She needed to tell him what was going on. And he told her that yes, she knew that they were drinking antifreeze, but they didn't know that they were drinking antifreeze. I like the way he flipped that personally. Diane then admitted that she just didn't know what else to do. She said that there were so many arguments. She explained that there was just so much going on. She then explained that she would put a little bit in Sarah and Shaun's Coca-Cola and Mark's Gatorade, and as antifreeze is odorless and it doesn't have much taste, they wouldn't realize that there was anything being added to their drinks. And then when she was further pressed and asked why she was doing this, she had different reasons for different family members. So for her husband, she had basically told the detective that when Mark died, it was actually a relief. I don't tell people that. I don't know what else to say. By then, I hated his guts. He would throw things at me. He would throw things at the kids. I guess I just had enough. That's what she said about Mark. Shaun, who had been diagnosed with ASD, was on the autistic spectrum, and she was obviously Diane's next target. She said Shaun would be interfering with what I would do. He was more than a bother, more than a pest. What a way to talk about your child who's got additional needs. And then in regards to her oldest daughter, Sarah, she basically said that she poisoned her because she didn't want to pay her college debt, which is wild. That is, yeah. In America, it's a bit different because here in the UK, the way student debt is set up, you don't start paying back your student loan until you're earning over a certain amount of money. Now, they may change that one day, but for those of us that graduated a while ago, we are still on a plan that says you have to earn, I think it's over 27,000, which isn't that much money, but £27,000 a year. Then you start paying back your student loan, and they basically take like a percentage out of your wages. Whereas here it seems like you've graduated, we want our money back. So Diane wasn't feeling that setup, and she just wanted to get rid of the loan. And the way to get rid of the loan and the debt was, in her eyes, to get rid of the daughter that brought the debt into the home, which is, say it with me, wild. Now, Rachel is now also being looked at as a suspect. Not just Diane. Now Diane and Rachel are being looked at as suspects. And they, after being arrested for the murders, claimed that the targeted family members were burdens on them. Diane alleged that Mark was lazy and he would throw objects at her when he was angry, and that she was just at the point of killing him because she hated his guts. She claimed that Shaun was worse than a pet, and that he was always at home because he had trouble socializing. Obviously, there are different affects when it comes to being autistic. When you're on the spectrum, that's why it's a spectrum. And socially, that was one of the things that he struggled with because of his autism, and that is one of the things that led her to kill him. I don't know how that makes sense. Although Rachel claimed that she had initially felt that her brother's death was unfair, arguing that her mother should have just placed Shaun in an assisted living complex, or placed him in assisted living instead of doing what she did. The unalivings of both Mark and Shaun occurred within 5 months of each other. Like we said before, it was 147 days. And both victims were found with that suspicious ring of blood around their mouths. But the deaths were not investigated any further, owing in part to the fact that Mark regularly consumed alcohol. Both of them, though, were cremated, which I find interesting. It's a way for her to get rid of the bodies. And then Diane went further on, saying that when she considered unaliving Sarah as well, that was basically down to her not wanting to pay Sarah's debts. The reason they had taken Sarah to the hospital, if it isn't bad enough already, was because Diane didn't want the house to smell bad if Sarah had died in the house. And by that point, Diane had used Mark's $20,000 life insurance policy to move the family to another home for more space, but had killed Shaun in the same home. Rachel was also bothered by the prospect of Sarah dying in the house because she had moved into the room that Shaun had died in, and she claimed that it was unsettling to her. And that is why they took her to the hospital. Not because they cared that she was getting sick, basically because they didn't want the house to smell, and Rachel didn't want to feel uncomfortable knowing that there was another dead body in the home. A note was also discovered in Rachel's purse, which Rachel had written some really bizarre notes and poems on it. One read, "Only the quiet ones will be left. My mother, my little sister, and me." That's what she thinks. Because I also feel like if Diane had worked out that Rachel felt some type of way about these unalivings, I'm sure the mum would have got rid of her as well. The hidden diary revealed that Rachel herself had been involved directly with the unalivings, and that she had been aware of Mark's impending poisoning at least 2 months before they actually happened. When they searched the home of Diane after the confessions, inside the garage on a workbench, they found a bottle of antifreeze, which was intentionally purchased to be one that was odorless and tasteless, and they found it next to a 6-pack of Coca-Cola. Inside the house was completely a mess, and there was a lot of things that were collected, including a small purple journal that was haphazardly thrown on a bookshelf. When one of the detectives began reading the journal, that's when he discovered that Diane did not act alone. It belonged to Rachel, and one of the other entries read, "It's sad when I realized how my father will pass on in the next 2 months." Premeditation at its peak. She knew exactly what was going to happen. "Shaun, my brother, will move on shortly after. It will be tough getting used to the changes, but everything will work out." Now, I feel like this counteracts her comment about saying that the mum should have just put Shaun in assisted living, because she knew the mum's intent and did absolutely nothing about trying to stop the actions taking place. The journal was dated the 13th of June 2011, which was just under a year before Mark died. There was also an entry in which Rachel had wrote about being thankful that she had time to prepare for each of their deaths, and that she would be getting her father's car. When I did this research, it still feels the same. It's just ridiculous. Rachel was brought back to the police station for questioning. When she asked if she was suspicious of her mother, Rachel said that she never was. She added that her and her mother were very close. They're like best friends. And she said that her mother was the only person who really understood her. The detective then slid a copy of the journal entry across the table for Rachel to look at. And he later said that he could see Rachel's wheels turning in her head, like she was trying to figure out how to explain what she was looking at. She told the detective that she had been having a lot of really bad dreams about her family members dying, and that's what that entry was about. It wasn't that she was planning with her mum to unalive her father and her brother. It was that these were dreams that she was writing down in her journal. And she had then said that when she told her mum about the dreams, that's when her mother started thinking about hurting her dad, brother and sister. And it wasn't long before Rachel confessed to her involvement. It didn't take much time between being shown that piece of evidence and her confessing to being involved in this case. And she explains to the detectives that she and her mother researched different methods of homicide, including suffocation and pills, but they decided on the antifreeze because Rachel had told her mother that it would be the easiest method to use. Diane brought the antifreeze online, allegedly, because the antifreeze that was sold in stores contained a bittering agent that avoids people basically drinking it because it tastes bitter. So they intentionally ordered this one online because it had no taste and it was odorless. Rachel had explained that her father was a drain on the family, explaining he had no concept of money and he was always out partying. She said that she wasn't entirely on board with unaliving her brother. What she said about Shaun to the detectives was, Shaun, we argued on a lot because I still think we could have put him in assisted living, but she wanted him out. Sarah was equally unneeded. We would have found some place else for her. She was adamant on that Sarah was just a burden, that Sarah needed to be taken care of. Now, I don't know why the two of them couldn't just leave. They clearly didn't want to be in the home with Shaun and Sarah. Why did they not just leave Mark, Sarah and Shaun in their own little bubble? Because if she can suggest that they shouldn't do anything to Sarah and Shaun should be placed in assisted living, she has the wherewithal to think of alternatives to homicide, but clearly doesn't have the willpower. Despite saying all of that, she still agreed with the plan to unalive Sarah, and she said that her sister was annoying. So she basically just lived in the back room and had no gumption to go and find a job. That's what she said about her sister. Another scary fact is that Rachel also admitted that after Sarah's death, she and her mother had planned to unalive the youngest child. I told you it was coming. I knew it was coming because the youngest had a learning disability. If they're getting rid of Shaun for that reason, why wouldn't they get rid of the youngest for that reason? Thankfully, that never happened. They never started giving her the poison, the antifreeze. And at this point, everything was coming together. Everything made sense. The symptoms, the deaths, the timeline. One thing that stood out, though, was if they wanted Sarah dead, why did they take her to the hospital? And then the simple answer for that is we've covered already. It was because they didn't want the house to smell. Rachel had one simple answer. She said, I didn't want another one to die in the house because houses are nasty after somebody's died in it. I get a lot of nightmares. After Shaun died, I moved into his room and it was awful in there. I kept feeling things in there. I just didn't want that again. Why did she move into Shaun's room? That to me in itself is just stupid. Why would you do that? More things came to light about things leading up to the homicide, especially Mark's. One of the bandmates said that he last saw him on the Friday before he died, and the band was supposed to have a recording session, but they never actually recorded because Mark was so out of it. It didn't even click with him that they were supposed to be recording. His bandmate said that it was clear something was wrong and that Mark's skin was yellow. Detectives found posts on Shaun's Facebook page leading up to his father's death. And then on April the 1st, just a week before Mark's death, Shaun posted, my father is suffering from an incurable mental illness and he's likely to die. Why he would think it's a mental illness, I don't know. But then, was it him that posted that? On April the 2nd, Shaun posted, my father is slowly starting to have problems with drinking and accomplishing anything. When he drove a car, the car swerved a little bit. I had to help him keep the car direction straight and properly turning. On April the 5th, he wrote, my father is so insane that I don't want to be friends with him anymore. Oh, that's really sad. And Shaun's post described a man who was slowly becoming strange and out of control, very likely due to the repeated doses of antifreeze that he was being forcibly given, though he didn't know about it, by his wife and his daughter. On April the 6th, Shaun wrote, my father has changed from panic, aggressive and selfish to depressed and suicidal. He took his car, wallet and cell phone. He said he would commit suicide rather than torment us. I don't know if I will see him alive. He no longer cares about himself. He never truly listened to other people. If he is dead, I want to see him to make sure he is dead. On April the 7th, Shaun said, my father is slowly getting sicker. His voice is slurred. His walking is wobbly. His body is more tired than normal. He had to rest when he realised his driving was swerving the car a little bit. He's sleeping in bed longer than us. He may collapse under his weight at any time. And then on April the 8th, the day his father passed away, the day his father died, Shaun posted, my father is so weary that he must have spent half of the day in bed. His motor skills are deteriorated to the point where he cannot mow a lawn properly or drive a vehicle safely. If he gets behind the steering wheel of any vehicle, his failing motor skills would put pets, people and himself in danger. To have to witness that as the child, and even Diane and Rachel themselves, there is a sense of evil in these two women that no amount of objectively looking at this case is going to make me think otherwise. I will look at it objectively and put the academic lens in there, but they are just evil. As they were being questioned, Rachel and Diane were being questioned in the hospital, Sarah slowly started getting better. Her health was improving and she was recovering in the hospital. No one expected her to survive. However, she was finally improving. Unfortunately though, she was now left with lifelong brain damage. She had to learn how to do the bare basics again, like walking. Most importantly though, she was alive. She had survived this horrendous ordeal. When she learned that her mother and sister were responsible for this, Sarah had actually said that she was worried about something happening. She had found a journal of her mother's where Diane had written that Mark died, then Shaun, then listed her name. When she asked her mum about it, Diane had said, she basically told Sarah, don't worry. She told her not to worry about it. She wasn't going to die. Little did she know that the mum was actually poisoning her. It was finally revealed that the anonymous tipster that had given the detectives the information that they needed to start working on this case was actually Senior Pastor Jeff Sippy, the pastor at the family's church. You know, the church that she kept on running to every day when she was doing this on Easter Sunday and then the 147 days after. It was actually the pastor of the church. After Mark's death, Pastor Sippy had concerns, but those concerns turned into suspicion after Shaun died as well. When Sarah was taken to the hospital and he found out that she was in the ICU nearing death, he immediately called the police department and shared his suspicions, because at this point I think he probably knew it was the doings of someone in that household. And it is possible that had he had not been the tipster, had he had not gone to the investigators and gone to the police department, this case may not have been investigated. Dare I say, Sarah may not have survived. And even if she did, now she was surviving with all these issues. She would have gone back into the care of the mother and Rachel, Diane and Rachel. Maybe something may have happened thereafter. The pastor explained that though he could see Diane struggling and that the family were stressed and overwhelmed, Diane had never told him about Mark having a problem with alcohol. Now she's telling everybody he's a drinker, he's a partier, he takes substances. But she had never said that to the pastor that she was there with every Sunday, every week. She had not said anything to him, and he could tell that something was very wrong. He'd never asked him for help or for prayer, and the detective himself made references to how strong her faith was. Someone that's strong in their faith would have gone to the pastor and said, this is what we're dealing with, please give us help, we need counsel, we need prayer. She'd never done that. So what happened in the aftermath? Both Rachel and Diane were arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree homicide and 1 count of assault for Sarah. In March 2015, Rachel agreed to plead guilty to second-degree homicide and agreed to testify against her mother in exchange for the death penalty to be taken off the table. Another death penalty case, peoples, and in the comments tell me, do you think they would have got do you think she would have got the death penalty had she have not taken this plea deal? Instead, she was sentenced to 2 life-term sentences in prison with an additional 20 years, but will be eligible for parole in 42 years. She will be around 65 years old at the time. Here's the thing, if you give someone a life sentence, what's the point of the additional years? You know, like with R. Kelly, they gave him life and then they gave him 99. No, didn't give him life. They gave him 99 years or something like that. What's the point? If you've given someone 2 life sentences, surely they must need to spend life in prison. What's the point of the 20 years? Or they'll give someone, they'll sentence someone. I think there was someone I read about and they got sentenced to 456 years in prison. Please, what is the rationale behind that? I don't understand it. I understand that they put all of these different charges. So someone might have 18 charges and they'll get a sentence for each individual charge. I get that. But surely if you give someone 456 years, you should just give them a life sentence and say there's no parole. I don't understand that. Please, in the comments, what is the point? What is the purpose? Diane entered an Alford plea. Now, an Alford plea is when you don't necessarily admit guilt, but you acknowledge that the prosecutors have enough evidence to basically put you under the prison. So she entered an Alford plea where she was not going to admit to her guilt, but she did acknowledge that through evidence they could convict her. She is serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole for first-degree homicide and first-degree assault. She is never going to get out of prison, she's never going to get released. Good. And I believe that Rachel should have got the same. I know she didn't think her brother should have been unalived and she didn't think her sister should have been unalived. She believed that her brother should have gone to assisted living and that her sister should have, I don't know, they shouldn't have done what they did to the sister. But she still was giving them the antifreeze. So my opinion, I'm being subjective, she should stay in there for life too. Years after her attempted homicide, Sarah explained how she felt about this whole ordeal on an episode of 2020. And when she found out that her mother and her sister were responsible for creating the set of circumstances that put her in the position that she's currently in, as well as the homicides of her father and her brother, she said, "I just felt like I wanted to slap both of them and call them B words." Oh, still quite innocent. Think slaps and very generous. During Rachel's sentencing, she read a statement apologizing to her older sister. She said, "I'm sorry I couldn't find the courage to stand up for what was right, to go for help, to protect you and our siblings. Your suffering could have been prevented and I hate myself for not being there for you. I want you to know that you are an inspiration for me." Though Rachel appeared to have some emotion, those in the courtroom, probably you guys as well, and especially how I feel about it, they noted there was a lot of crying, but there weren't no tears. And yes, that is a thing. If anyone watches Faking It on Prime, one of the key things that they see is the head nod, even when they're saying no, and where people cry, but they don't produce no tears. And it's a natural response. If your body is actually filled with emotion and you're crying, you're naturally inclined to have tears, right? But she had none. Diane, on the other hand, didn't even bother with pretending to cry. There was absolutely no emotion from her, and we know that this woman is an emotionless witch, so that doesn't really surprise me. She, even to this point, is still denying that she poisoned her family members. She also did an interview for 2020, and Diane stated that she was told what to say during her police interview. She said, I was told what to say, I won't say by who. And then she said that Rachel doesn't know the whole story. This woman is just an idiot. She's just saying things without even thinking about what she's saying. She said that Rachel doesn't know the whole story and she can't say much because of her family's safety. Most notably, Diane continues to make the situation revolve around her being the victim, explaining that when Sarah was in the hospital, she herself was sick, which means that she herself could also have been poisoned. Detectives have completely thrown this out. They've said there was absolutely no signs or any symptoms shown from Diane that would have been consistent with her being poisoned when they spoke to her. Also, I want to remind you that the nurses regularly heard her laughing and joking about how Sarah's illness is not going to stop her from going on holiday. So, as of 2016, Sarah was living in an assisted care facility. The same assisted care facility they said they should have put Shaun in. Not the same one, but, you know, they said that's where they should have put him. And she has now got a state-appointed guardian. She's developed a great devotion to her faith and church, and she says that she still feels her father and her brother around. She said that they're like angels watching over her, and every once in a while she has them visit her in dreams beyond the grave, which I think is beautiful. That's the way that she still feels connected to her father and her brother. She said that she will never forget what her mother and sister have done to her, and that she's using her faith to help her move forward. She said, I forgive them for what they did because forgiveness is the right thing to do. Remember that Rachel said about they had also thought about unaliving the younger sister. Well, Rachel and Diane admitted that the youngest daughter, Brianna, was poisoned after Sarah's death because of, everyone say it in the comments, because of her learning disability, which we knew that that's what they were going to do. If they're going to get rid of Shaun because of his autism, then their illogical logic would mean that they would also get rid of Brianna, which is pathetic. She was in 4th grade. She was 9. I mean, any age is ridiculous that you're even thinking about doing this. But they were already poisoning her when Sarah was in hospital. Now, I will say, when I was doing this research, there are conflicting facts about the poisoning or not poisoning of Brianna. I'm gonna use the word logic, but it's not logic. Logic dictates if in the diary Rachel had written about unaliving the youngest sister because of her learning disability, potentially they could have started poisoning her. However, because of the two or many conflicting articles and reports that I've read, I can't say that they did actually poison her. However, there is the potential that they did do that. Now we've been through all of that, I'm going to take a sip of my coffee, because that was a lot. And we're going to look at this through the academic lens. Now, there are a few academic lenses we could look at. We could consider the family systems theory, where we can look at scapegoating dynamics, victims cast as burdens, easing the family stress. So Shaun was said to have been a burden on the family because of his autism. Similarly, Sarah was a burden because of her student debt. Obviously, normal, logical, sane people would say, no, they're not burdens. They are, they're your family. We deal with family and obstacles as we should because we are a family. However, we can also see the dynamics of the family where Diane favoured Rachel, the supposed normal child, over the other 3 children. So that is a lens we could look through, and this could then lead into the enmeshment, looking at Diane's favoritism toward Rachel and how this enabled this collision against other family members, and a mix of terrible dynamics that led to this end result. and the homicide and attempted homicide of Mark, Shaun and Sarah, maybe Brianna. However, we're not going to look at it through that lens. Another lens we could potentially cover could be gendered violence and feminist criminology. In this case destabilizes normal gender roles, especially with Diane being the breadwinner. That's a gender role. The assumption is that men are breadwinners and wives are homemakers. That's a stereotype, but that's a gender role. But also with Diane picking and choosing the so-called weak links in the family, Mark, Sarah and Shaun. And it's a bit like the survival of the fittest in the wild, where animals will abandon and sometimes unalive weak cubs, kittens, babies in the wild because they are runts or they're not very strong. Diane's behavior was extremely animalistic, and the power, agency and societal expectations demonstrated here, they collide because the woman has weaponized caregiving tools, food and drink, as a way to eliminate the weak links, essentially. There's also moral disengagement and social cognitive theory. So where she's a mother, considering mothers who commit homicides, that completely defies the maternal instinct stereotype. When we consider cases like Susan Smith, Tiandra Chisholm, Andrea Yates, and we discuss how mothers can completely disengage from their maternal instinct to be murderers, they are completely outside of the stereotype of being the sacrificing mother. Why could none of these women, including Diane, not put all of their children's needs above their own and overlook the challenges presented by the children? Sarah Smith's challenge was the fact that she wanted a man, allegedly. She wanted a man, but a man didn't want no children. So she got rid of the barrier, which was the children, as opposed to getting rid of the man, because you've got the children already. That was her issue. The other one, in this case, where we see Diane, her needs were financial and social. Financially, she didn't want to take on the debt of her oldest daughter, and socially, she couldn't take her son out anywhere. He didn't have a social life because he was autistic. She couldn't put the needs of her children above her own. Her son needed her because of his additional needs. Her daughter needed her because of her financial needs. Yes, we can argue that the daughter should have gone and got a job. We can argue that till we're blue in the face. However, the fact is she didn't have a job, so the debt fell to her parents. And instead of the mum putting her needs above her own, she completely falls out of the stereotype of the maternal instinct and just chooses to unalive her children. And that links into the theory I do want to talk about, which is filicide, and how filicide can be linked with moral disengagement. There are quite a few filicide typologies, and the first one that we're going to think about is called altruistic filicide, which is when a parent unalives their child out of a distorted sense of compassion or protection. They did it because they would be better off not alive. And some of the common features for this are depression or psychosis. So Andrea Yates' case, for example, that filicide was because she was saving the children from eternal damnation. That's what she believed. It says it's often planned or methodical, and some of the facts are the psychological substrate. So an overwhelming sense of guilt, distorted caregiving drive, or a delusional belief that death is a gift. Death is better than the person living. And some examples of this is when a mother may unalive her terminally ill child because they feel that they need to alleviate that child from their suffering or spare them from any pain that they might be experiencing. It's kind of also along the lines, like I said, of Andrea Yates, where she did what she did to save her children's soul, essentially. Then you have child-hating filicide, which is the homicide of a child born into circumstances that the parent deeply resents. It's commonly features anger, frustration, impulsivity. It often follows repeated conflicts or a perceived provocation by the child. There's a deep-seated rage at the child as an extension of personal failures or losses. And an example of this is when a parent snaps and in a fit of rage during a temper tantrum. So one of the cases was where Tiandra unalives Hazana, and her reasoning behind not unaliving her, but her reason behind beating her was that she wouldn't stop crying. So it's almost like she snapped and got angry that she was acting this way. Then you've got accidental filicide, which in brackets is neglect, and it's where a child dies because of parental neglect, reckless disregard for the child's life, endangerment, rather than the actual intent to commit a homicide. Some of the failures are where parents fail to seek medical help for their child, medical care. They have unsafe sleeping environments. There is substance abuse in the home, and in these cases the psychological factor is the substance misuse, abuse, chaotic home conditions, cognitive impairment. They're not able to think straight, and that leads to neglect and then leads to death. An example of this would be leaving a child in a hot car or failing to treat an infected wound. So where you may have heard of cases where the mum left the child in the car and she just quickly popped to the shop, but she was also under the influence and the child ends up passing away, that would come under this umbrella. Then you've got unwanted child filicide, where a child is perceived as unwanted by one or both of the parents and is unalived soon after birth or infancy. Some common features that that may be found here is concealed pregnancies, denial of paternity, and social stigma. And I've spoken in a previous video about how labeling can lead to stigma and stigma can lead to death. I speak about that in this video, which is completely not on the topic of this, but it's an interesting video, so go and watch it after this one. And some of the psychological strata behind this one is shame and economic hardship. Actually, you could argue that in the Miyuki Ishikawa case, that is in some sense an example of unwanted filicide. Though the parents didn't directly commit the crime, they didn't directly neglect the children, they didn't directly commit these homicides, which weren't actually, but the mother abandoning the newborn is an example of this. They abandon or they unalive a newborn, and what they did in post-war Japan was they were unable to take care of their children, their babies, so they would give them to these homes that then they said they would take care of the children. And in the Miyuki Ishikawa case, they gave up that responsibility to Miyuki Ishikawa, and she in a sense performed indirect unwanted child filicide, because as they gave their children over to her, she then committed homicide based on the fact that she said they were mercy killings, they were mercy unalivings, because they didn't want to allow the children to suffer in life, through life. The parents couldn't look after them, therefore they just basically let them starve to death. Go and have a look at that video and let me know what you think in the comments. And then finally we have spouse revenge filicide, which is where a parent commits a homicide of a child to punish or get revenge on their spouse, their partner. Some of the common factors behind this, the common features behind this is marital discord, custody battles. There have been a couple of cases where a parent has committed homicide of children because they didn't want the other half to have the child, or they've committed matricide because they didn't want the partner to take the child, or there's threats of divorce or separation. And some of the psychological strata behind this is the desire to inflict the maximum emotional pain, stress, anguish on the spouse. It has nothing to do with the child, but it's all to do with the spouse. You want to hurt them so much, and the one thing that you can use to do that is the child that you created together. Now, in Diane's case, we see a blend of two different typologies. We see the altruistic burden relief type of filicide, where she portrayed her older son, Shaun, as someone who was a burden on the family because of his autism and his lack of being able to socialize. And she claimed that she was sparing him and herself the ongoing suffering of being that way inclined by using a tasteless poison. And that rationale mirrors the altruistic filicide, where mercy essentially in her warped mind is driving the narrative, because she thinks that he can't socialize, never going to have a life outside of this place, outside of this home. He never goes outside, and I'm going to spare him by basically removing him from this environment. Then you've got the spousal revenge component, kind of, where she poisons her husband. Now, that's essentially, it's not filicide, it's matricide, but their marriage had deep conflicts, financial strain, there was resentment of caregiving demands, and unaliving Mark served as a strike against him because, like she said, she just grew to hate him. And methodical purchase and covert administration of the poison aligns very closely with spousal revenge filicide, if he had gone after the child, in which the children or family suffer collateral damage, because essentially she was punishing him, but she was also punishing the children because of her hatred of him. And there's this psychodynamic intersection where Diane's planning, her concealment, and the enlistment of Rachel suggests pure rage, child-hating rage, not simple neglect. Even though she said she loved Diane so much and they were besties, you've got to still feel like there was some form of child hate towards Rachel to allow her to be able to put her in a position that she put her in. She created a murderer in her daughter because of the hatred she had for her husband and her children. And instead of showing love, she wove a storyline of relief. She needed to do this because she needed to relieve whatever was going on around her. The poisoning of the family was a sacrifice, and it was both compassionate, but it was also retaliatory. She was showing compassion for Shaun because he wouldn't cope out there without her. But she was also retaliating against Sarah and her husband because they were both financial burdens on her. So the filicide towards Shaun especially can be seen as altruistic. The filicide, the spousal revenge element of it, is more if that was he went after. This dual motive, it fractures neat categorization and highlights how complex psychopathology can be, and how psychopathology and relational dynamics can overlap in filicide cases. Sarah almost was a filicide case, and like I said, if she had gotten rid of Shaun before Mark, we could almost say that it was revenge filicide. However, maybe that's a bit up in the air. Now, this is an academic look at this case, and there could be so much more to unpack for this case in terms of the actions of Rachel and her manipulation almost into being Diane's helper. And I would like to know where you would go with this case. Do you agree that this linking of altruistic filicide and spousal revenge filicide are valid, even though I've kind of disputed my own fact of the spousal filicide? But anyways, let me know where you would go with this case. Where would your focus be? This case is tragic, and it could have been even more of a tragedy had Diane and Rachel had been successful with Sarah and potentially the youngest daughter, the youngest sister. However, it is still classed as a tragedy in Sarah's case because she was left with such drastic life-changing conditions. She is now in assisted living, the same place that Rachel suggested putting Shaun. So she's still classed as a tragedy because of the lifelong ailments that she's now suffering with. And this case opens our eyes to so many different theories, and it's not really as much of a warning as it has been with some of the other cases we've looked at, like the postnatal psychosis, the lack of psychological support and intervention in the case of the Vampire of Sacramento. But it is a reminder that behind the perfect family facade, there can be so much more going on behind the scenes. Case in point, a lot of these social media families that we see out there, something comes out at some point that it's not so perfect. There are many videos and cases revealing the truths of behind what these perfect families facades are and what is actually going on. So it's an important point of thought, especially given the fact that she posted on Facebook quite a bit with just her and Rachel, and it wasn't an obvious red flag to people knowing that she didn't show any of our other family members. It does show us that social media can be a smokescreen for the truth. It's not always rainbows and unicorns, people. We cannot believe everything we see online. The posting of her daughter religiously, but then leaving it 3 weeks to post about the death of Shaun, it speaks tremendously to the mindset of the wicked woman that Diane was. No, I'm not being objective, that is opinion, but I think we can clearly say factually that she was wicked. The academic lens of filicide, even though it is technically rare, yet we have seen quite a few cases of filicide in the last few stories that we've looked at, cases that we've looked at. I guess it is a bit of a warning, and it also shows that the fragility of the human mind, to me, is very well demonstrated in all of these cases, because to be coaxed into something like this, like Rachel was, her mother pushed her into doing something, is extremely scary. And yes, we can argue, well, she's her own person and she's got her own mind. Yes, we can. However, we can also see some manipulation and coaxing behind what Diane did. And then there's also the argument about whether the police and the medical professionals did enough, especially in Mark and Shaun's case. If they had not got that tip from the pastor, can it be argued that these homicides would never have been looked into and Sarah would have been placed back into the family and placed back into danger? Even when Mark and Shaun died, there were no red flags to the medical professionals or the police, and I feel like that is something that really could have gone sideways had it not had been picked up by the pastor. And it also shows how involvement in whatever background you're coming, whatever community, if it's a religious community, if it's a network of people, how when you are so involved, people can pick up on things. Like the pastor said, she never spoke to him about her husband's alcohol problems yet, or asked him for help or for prayer, yet that was something that she was adamant about when the police spoke to her. So it does demonstrate that when there is community, there are people that see when things are not so right. So that's it for today's case. This was a really long video. I hope you are still here, and if you are, thank you for staying with us. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, tell a friend, engage in the comments. Positive engagement, even negative engagement, is very, very useful, because we are on the road to 10,000 people. So let's get on that road together and let's hit that 10,000 mark. And like I said, let us know in the comments what you think of this case. What other cases would you like me to look into? I like to look at unusual cases, maternal cases, and also ones that are not so well known. Yes, I will be covering some of the more well-known cases. They are on my list of stories to look at, cases to look at. But what would you like me to investigate, look into, give an academic critique about. And remember, academic critique doesn't mean it's correct. If you did not agree with any of the critique that we've had today, if any of the lenses that we've looked through today, please let us know in the comments and let's have those conversations down below. And until next time, stay curious, stay caffeinated, stay critical, always question the narrative, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. That's it. Just want to talk about filicide, and then I just want to finish with closing thoughts. Do you know what I mean? You know when you tell a lie, my mum used to say to me, and my grandma used to say to me, when you tell a lie, you must remember the first lie you told, because when you keep on lying and you forget the first lie the first lie you told, you're gonna get catch. Someone is going to be able to identify the fact that you're telling a lie because you can't remember the first lie you told, right? Okay. Now, I am someone that believes that forgiveness does not mean forgetting. So I like the fact that she's said she will never forget, but even if it's for if it's for her own peace, she will forgive them for what they've done. The wow, I can't say the word. And no one could predict what strategies were going to. No one could predict the strategy. Strategies? Yeah. But no one could predict the strategy. The light went off.